Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 360. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the nationally acclaimed writer and celebrated historian, Glenn Fay. Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Boy, it couldn't be nicer outside right now. It's one of those, I don't know when people are going to be watching this, but this is possibly the crispest, clearest spring day, no bugs, sunshine, blue sky.
Right,
Couldn't be
right. I mean, right here, this is the perfect, like, this is one of some of the perfect times in late May in Vermont is like, especially it's like the bugs aren't out in full force. You can still have a nice cool night. As you say, the air's crisp, the sky is blue, the leaves are green. This is the second best time to visit Vermont. It's either the fall is the first time, but this is a time when all the perennials are popping. It's beautiful if you don't have allergies, I guess, then, Glenn.
Yes.
You're an accomplished author. You've put out a couple books already. The first one, Hidden History of Burlington, Vermont, which was your second book, correct? Your first book was Vermont's Ebenezer Allen, Patriot, Commando, and Emancipator.
Right.
And we'll talk about a couple of those books, but you also have a book, as of this recording, you also have a brand new book that's going to be out imminently, correct? Like in the next month or so?
This summer. Yeah.
This summer, called Ambition, The Remarkable Family of Ethan Allen. So talk to us a little bit before we jump into it about what made you start getting into the history of Vermont and also Ethan Allen.
Well, what made me start originally was I got a fellowship to study the War of 1812 maritime history on Lake Champlain. And I got to work with Art Cohn at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. And I found all these things out that I didn't know before about some of the stuff that went down on Lake Champlain during the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. And it blew my mind. So I was a science guy, but I quickly got really excited for the first time in my life about history when I found out all of these things and all of these stories. Um, and I said, someday I'm going to come back to this and I'm going to do some more research. And that someday came in 2017, 2018, when I left my job of 40 years teaching science to, do some, find myself. And one of the things I did is I joined the board of the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. And we were looking for a speaker for our Sunday lecture series, which happens once a month. And we were looking for a speaker to talk about Ebenezer Allen, who never really had a real biography, but he was a real incredible war hero in the Revolutionary War, cousin of Ethan and Ira Allen. And so I started looking around to see if anybody knew anything about him or any local historical societies had any experts, and nobody did. So I said, well, I know a little something about him. Let me dig a little deeper. And one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I had enough for like a master's thesis, And so I actually met a colleague at a lecture at the Homestead who said, you ought to talk to the History Press. They're looking for authors. And so I did. And they normally don't do biographies, but they were intrigued and they bought it. And so Ebenezer Allen came out a couple of years later, and it all from there, History Press came back to me and said, how'd you like to do a book called The Hidden History of Burlington, which is the city I grew up in. So I knew a lot about Burlington and loved the research and was close to UVM, where a lot of information is in the special collections library and so forth. So that's how it started. It was just one thing after another, and
Right.
and I'm still writing.
What's amazing because you mentioned Vermont's Ebenezer Allen came out in 2021, and then in 2022 you came out with The Hidden History of Burlington. But Arcadia Press gave you the title first. Is that what you said?
They did, yeah. When you go to a publisher, a traditional publisher, often they control the title, they control the cover page, they
Hmm.
control the format. In their case, they were looking for, you know, a certain number of pictures, a certain number of words and pages, which is their template. And you will
Hmm.
see the hidden history of Burlington, the hidden history of Vermont, the hidden history of Washington, D.C. So they're
Okay.
a nationwide publisher that, that does these things, and they're very successful. And they
Hmm.
said, no one's ever done a hidden history of Burlington. It's waiting to be done. And so I jumped at the chance. It's a fascinating
Right.
city, and from the beginning to today.
Glenn, for someone that you like went from being a science teacher to now writing history, is there seems to be a parallel? Because almost as a science teacher, you're always searching for answers, and in history, do you see that being your background of being in science to naturally fitting into learning about history as well? Then.
I don't know. It's really history never was colorful like
Mm,
science was. I didn't see it as being real. It was old. It was.
right.
I think my science skills, being a left brainer, helped me with the history because the research. I've done a lot of research before, so it comes naturally. And to uncover, to hold a letter that Ethan Allen wrote to his brother, um, you know, in Burlington, and see that signature, that's really exciting stuff. That
Right.
kind of brings it into reality and into focus. And to see old pictures of ships that sailed into Burlington Harbor, or to read accounts of shipwrecks, on the lake from eyewitnesses. It's pretty chilling. And so that kind of experience of another area is the medical treatments in the Revolutionary War. It would make anybody cringe to know that what would happen if you lost a limb in the Battle of
Right.
Plattsburgh Bay or at Valcour Island, what the medical treatment was and how it worked. But you can actually read notes and books from doctors that were there
Wow.
describing, what they did. And it was Byzantine.
Wow.
It was, they would, I don't know how graphic you want me to go here, but they would literally cut off limbs, wrap them. This is before they knew about germs. Wrap them up
Right.
in a rag, give them a pint of whiskey, and come back in a week and see how it was if the guy was still alive. And
Wow.
if they were lucky, they would get opium, laudanum, but they would give them lead apatite and mercury calomel as drugs. And nowadays we know this is poison.
Right.
So the medical stuff and the science stuff, the do no harm ethic that doctors have today,
Right.
exist, and they were it was horrible.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Now, so your new book, Ambition, coming out, is this more or less a spiritual successor or a sequel to the Ebenezer Allen book in that sense?
Um, well, what I wanted to do is nobody has really thought about or researched or written about um, Ethan Allen's family, his
Mm,
brothers and sisters, their relationships, um, the exactly what he did and who he was. So there's two camps out there. There's the biographers that believe he was this hero and this war hero who was a founder of Vermont and he could do no wrong. And then there's another side who think he was really overrated and he was
mm,
kind of invented in the 1800s when Vermont needed a hero, but he was not as important as some of our other predecessors in the 1700s. So what I want to do is look at it objectively, look at the primary sources, look at what
okay.
we have for evidence, and find out, just who this guy was, and also what his contributions were to creating Vermont, and how did he behave with the Indians, and did he own slaves or not? And so those hard questions that other people have either shied away from or they couldn't really get a handle on. That's what I want to do.
So, what would you say are some of the more surprising or challenging aspects of Ethan Allen's family and the Allen family in general that you kind of discovered or uncovered during the researching of this book? Then,
Well, Ethan was the oldest, yet he was not really the patriarch.
okay.
Ira became, well, Heman, kind of a middle brother, was the statesman, and he was the patriarch for a long time. Ethan was actually in British prison for 2.5 years. But Ira became a patriarch when the men started dying, the brothers started dying. The wives and children would go to live with Ira in Sunderland, Vermont, down near Arlington and Manchester, and later in Colchester and what's now Winooski. So, so Ira was the youngest, and he was he Ira has two sides as well. He ended up dying a pauper.
Oh wow.
And one of the other brothers, Levi, who was a high roller, a merchant, and owned the between Ira and Levi and Ethan and Zimri and Heman, those brothers owned hundreds of thousands of acres in Vermont at one time.
Wow.
The problem was the economy was terrible for the
Mm,
whole time, that late 1700s period. So they couldn't turn it over. They couldn't get their money out. So there was no cash in the economy. And everybody was doing everything by either bartering or writing invoices, bills and IOUs. So it was a
mm.
really, litigious situation, and people would get sued. They would get put in debtor's prison if you
Oh
couldn't
right.
pay. Um, so that's it got really ugly toward the end for that
Mm.
family in that respect.
Well, it's interesting, like you mentioned earlier, that you're in your in your new book, you're exploring the women, the servants, the in the indigenous people of Vermont. Uh, how were those relationships with the men in the Allen family, and how was there? What were the family dynamics like? And did that have anything to do with like even the founding of Vermont as well?
Well, really interesting dynamics. The women were typically in that era had no rights. They couldn't own property. If
Hmm.
their husband died, the property went to the kids. The wife, surviving widow, couldn't sell the land or the property. So women really had no rights. They couldn't vote.
Wow. Yeah.
Men could vote, and even, Vermont tried to abolish slavery, and free slaves could vote, but women really had it tough, and their lot. If you read the histories and you read the letters, the women typically, what they were signing on to was staying home and raising a family in frontier conditions, while the men often were off hunting, for a living, or trying to develop property, or starting a mill somewhere. And so it was really rough for women. And what's interesting is Ethan's first wife, who was, I believe, 6 years older than him,
Mm.
died at 51.
Wow.
And he remarried a woman named Fanny Montresor, who was a loyalist. She was the stepdaughter of a British loyalist who was a Yorker, who had put a bounty on Ethan's head. So, so this is a really interesting chapter. She was 24, I believe. He was 48 or 49 when they
Huh.
met and married in Westminster, Vermont. And they had three kids together who all survived to adulthood, and were, Fanny Allen Jr., Fanny Margaret Allen, their daughter, became
Right.
this famous nun. He was a deist. He didn't believe in, religion or
Right.
God as we know it. So you've got all these interesting turns, and they apparently were both intellectuals. Ethan wrote a couple books, although we have no surviving letters from Fanny Montresor Allen. She remarried to a doctor, and had four more kids and
Wow.
lived happily
Okay.
ever after.
Right.
So we have these. Some of these women were, you know, they were stuck in this situation of pretty much, frontier running the homestead most of the time, and others like his loyalist wife, Fanny, grew up in a very wealthy, affluent family in New York City and Westminster, Vermont, with
Mm.
with servants, possibly slaves. So you do have, different walks of life for women, but most of them really did not have any kind of rights like we would think of
Right.
today.
And what about discovering any aspects with the relationships with the indigenous population? Was anything in the book about that as well?
It's pretty hard because there's very little written. There is a letter that Ethan wrote, trying to get the Indians, as they called them, and is generally accepted today, the word
Hmm.
we would use to represent different tribes of individuals who were either on the British side or on the American side, but trying to entice Indians to fight for the Patriots for the American side. He wrote a letter, um, but there's very little, solid primary source evidence. Some of the old biographers say the Indians taught him to hunt and fish, and he was, taught them all the trails in the mountains, and they did all this stuff. But there's no real data to support that. It's mostly folklore, and there's oral tradition, which some people put more stock in than others.
Mm.
But we don't really have a clear understanding of that.
What's your hope that the readers will take away from your book Ambition?
Well, it's a fresh look at Ethan Allen's family. So it's not
Mm,
so much a biography about him, but it's about, it's a balanced look at his family. And, if nothing else, um, they were developers. The men were. The women were fierce, frontier women who, did everything. Um, so it does get into the lifestyles of what it was like. There are some letters between Ira and Fanny and Levi's wife and Ethan that are kind of interesting. They
mm,
reveal some family dynamics, like all families have, between different people in the family and the kinds of, um, you know, difficulties or challenges they face. Um, and there is a discussion about enslavement, about the institution of slavery, and
mm,
where does Ethan, where do the Allens fit on that continuum, and what do we know about that?
right.
And so that's what the reader can find. And the last chapter really is about what did he contribute to Vermont, and how important was he to the founding of Vermont. And the fact of the matter is that Ethan wrote um, dozens, probably scores of propaganda articles against New York, at a time when both New York and New Hampshire claimed Vermont land. It was called the New Hampshire Grants by the Allens, who were buying those land lots from the governor of New Hampshire. But the New Yorkers believed it was their land, and they were mostly aristocrats who had the land given to them. So they would give away chunks of land. But all of
Mm,
Vermont was part of New York, according to the king in the
hmm
1760s. So
right.
it's really miraculous that the Allen junto, as they call it, the Arlington junto, which is Ethan and Ira, Governor Tom Chittenden, a bunch of Green Mountain boys, were able to somehow take that away from New York. And the Revolutionary War kind of intervened and distracted everybody away from that problem. But
Mm,
that's why we didn't get statehood until 1791. New York refused in the Continental Congress, and the U.S. Congress refused to grant us statehood based on
mm.
the fact that they believed they owned Vermont.
And during that time, Vermont was also for 14 years was its own
It
country.
was an independent republic.
If people want to learn more about your work, Glenn, where's the best place I could go to?
Well, the best place they can go is Facebook, and if you look for my name, you'll see. I have two group pages, one for the Ebenezer Allen book, and it's basically overflow and new research that I've been doing, and the Hidden History of Burlington group, which again, there's more pictures. I have more pictures that I could possibly fit in a book. So I'm continually putting weekly posts up. And the new book, The Ambition, The Remarkable Family of Ethan Allen, will have a group page as soon as we have a cover that's gelled. Um, and that's going to be in the next few weeks.
Is also because your other two books are a little under 200 pages. Is Ambition around the same
So it's
length,
over
or is it
200. Yeah.
okay?
And
Wow.
the
All
the
right.
other two were under 200 because the publisher had a limit on the pages, and they
Okay.
definitely could be longer. But um, that's what Facebook is all about. It's a free forum for me to
Right.
put it out there and enrich it.
Right. Excellent. Well, Glenn, when you come out with your fourth book, you're going to have to come back on the show and we'll talk about that too.
Sure thing. Thanks,
Yeah.
Barney.
Is that a bird's nest or is that a wreath or something behind you? What is it?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a bittersweet wreath. I should probably take that down. That's terrible. But I guess it adds to the mystique, right?
Right. See.
This is it's like a spare bedroom slash office where I do my work. So uh,
Okay.
you're going to see some weird things here, probably.
It's very Vermonter-ish. See, that's good. See, yeah,
Nothing moving, I hope.
yeah. See, it's very you can tell you're a seventh generation Vermonter with the old clock behind you and the wreath. See, so
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go.
All right, Glenn. Let me do the intro, and then